All right, now that we know how to scout and identify the major diseases in greenhouse, I want to get into more or less the managing of these diseases. I know we touched base on some management practices, but this goes into a lot more detail if you were to be managing this greenhouse. So I know we mentioned the largest factor is that sanitation. So just following these guidelines for the sanitation is going to be really important before planting, or remove all plant debris and weeds inside structure and even on the outside of the structure, because if they're on the perimeter of the outside of the structure, they're going to be coming in. So you just want to make sure all of those are eliminated either by applying herbicides, which herbicides are specifically for weeds, broadleaf weeds, herbicides. So either spraying herbicides or hand removing, whatever that might be, different cultural practices to remove those weeds, whatever you guys decide, but make sure those are discarded in the perimeter of the greenhouse, and then also specifically on the inside of the greenhouse. So whenever possible that you see any kinds of weeds, if it's in the pots, if it's growing in the corners of the cement, wherever it is, get rid of that as soon as possible. Discard the trash inside and outside. So every single day you should be removing all of the trash buildup that's in your one main trash can. You want to remove that and take it outside. If you have to burn it, burn it. We talked about before, if it has any kind of if it has any kind of plant material that was infected with any kind of diseases or insect infested, please burn it or autoclave it before you throw it away into a dumpster. You also want to sanitize benches, work surfaces, and tools with 10% bleach. So that would be really good. That Green Shield is a good one. I've seen that used plenty of times. We actually also use that in the Davy Tree Laboratory, their greenhouse as well. So that Green Shield is very beneficial, or just the 10% bleach, that is always a go-to as well. And then that last point before planting, it says if possible, maintain a 30-foot weed-free zone around the greenhouse to eliminate refuge for pathogens and insects. So we talked about just doing around that perimeter, but yeah, if you could do 30 feet off, that's also going to be very helpful, especially when you're dealing with the long-term effects of what weeds can do to the greenhouse. And we'll touch on weed control and identifying different common weeds in the greenhouse as well in another chapter. Another big one is don't allow field soil into the greenhouse. So field soil has not been pasteurized whatsoever. It has not been heated. So it has all of those natural enemies in there. It has all the biologicals. It has a lot of diseases, insects, all of the good stuff. So please don't allow that soil into the greenhouse. We use clean media, peat, perlite, vermiculite. Also, don't store trays and pots on bare soil. Even if you're storing it in winter outside on that bare soil, whenever it comes back in, make sure everything is sanitized and then air dried. And then if possible, we really don't want to put the pots on the ground. If they're on the ground, they are going to be more prone to getting any diseases or insects that are coming, because they are crawling insects as well. So we want to try to eliminate that ground, making that ground a bench, but we really want to utilize those raised benches if possible. So another one is clean shoes before entering structure. A lot of times there are shoe baths that you have to complete before entering a greenhouse. A lot of those larger facilities are going to have this. So it's usually right before you enter a greenhouse, you have this room that's your foot bath, and you have to make sure that you're not carrying anything on your shoes or anything like that before entering the greenhouse. And then when you're leaving the greenhouse, it's really important that if you have came across a certain disease or insect that is on the bottom of your shoes, that you don't bring it out into the world and contaminate everything else. So those the clean shoes and the shoe bath is going to be really important in your sanitation process. And you can install concrete or gravel walkways and cover soil under benches with gravel or landscape cloth. If you install these concrete or gravel walkways, you're going to make your workers more prone to be walking on these walkways and not to be just walking anywhere. And this is going to be really important because if we try to isolate the amount of walking activity that we have to only that one area on the walkways, we're going to decrease the contamination and spread of diseases and insects. So that's very good, as well as covering that soil under benches with gravel or landscape cloth. A lot of our diseases and then insects overwinter in the soil, so it's going to be really important to just cover that completely so it decreases photosynthesis, transport, light, air circulation, water, all of that, so we can decrease those populations of the overwintering organisms within that soil. And then if for some reason field soil has to be used in the greenhouse, if that's, to raise up the elevation or anything like that, or even used as a media, for some reason you have to sterilize this soil by heating it to 160 to 170 Fahrenheit for at least 30 minutes. And then you just want to keep the greenhouse tidy throughout the growing season. So every single day, even throughout the day, just make sure you're cleaning some stuff down, all the benches down, making sure you don't see any weeds, making sure you don't see any plant material that looks like it's getting a disease or other insects or any other pests. You also want to wash your hands regularly and avoid using tobacco products in the greenhouse. By washing your hands, you're taking care of all of the different bacteria or inoculum that you might have on your hands already. So you really want to make sure that that gets taken care of. And then you also want to avoid handling plants if foliage is wet. When foliage is wet, that's the most susceptible time. That gives the disease triangle that last element, the environment, so that inoculation can occur, and the spread of the different diseases and bacteria can occur from that water splash. So avoiding handling plants if the foliage is wet is going to be very important. So at the end of the season, it's just like spring cleaning. You're going to want to make sure you remove all the plant debris and weeds inside the structure, discard the trash, sanitize benches, work surfaces, and then close greenhouse for several weeks to promote those high temps. And this will kill off, weeds and insects. If you really crank up those temperatures, it's going to be really important because the insects and weeds don't have a chance to overwinter because the temperature is not cold, so their bodies are not going into that overwintering stage. But if you have those high temperatures, it might kill off a lot of those different insects and just burn them, essentially. Exclusion is also used when you're trying to manage these different diseases, and this is done by minimizing the movement of pathogens in the greenhouse. And then with this, sanitation always helps with the issue of exclusion, just by making sure if you do have that specific pathogen in the greenhouse presently, it doesn't move anywhere, by water splash, if you're moving the plants, if it's the plants are too close to each other, whatever that might be, just making sure that it stays in that one area. Another one is don't grow ornamentals and vegetables in the same greenhouse. If this must be done, keep them separated on different benches or parts of the greenhouse so we just don't spread the different diseases to each other. And then control insects and weeds in and around the greenhouse. And this could be a potential source of plant pathogens or vectors. So if we control those insects and mites and we keep it down to a very low level to none, if possible, that is going to be a lot better because that vector possibility is going to decrease a lot. And then just decreasing the weeds as well, that can also act as a source of, different pathogen spread. And then don't use water from different ponds, creeks, and rivers. There's Pythium and other pathogens are common in these. So using high quality water is going to be really good, especially if you can use that from like city water. City water is regulated. So using city water opposed to well water, or if you have ponds or creeks and rivers, it's all regulated already and you don't need to regulate it. And you can, they run tests every single season, every year for the different water quality. So you can confirm that your water quality is the best compared to using just natural, well in the ponds, creeks, and rivers. And then using pathogen-free planting material. growing transplants from seed if possible, because you know where that plant actually came from as a seed, and then growing from a seedling and then to the next stages of the plant. Buy seeds from a reputable source. Doing your research is going to be really important here. You don't want to just buy seeds and buy plant material because it's the cheapest. You want to make sure the quality is the best, and that quality is huge. So you want to do your research, ask around. I feel like in the horticulture industry, a lot of the different companies are very open to share their knowledge and experiences. So make some phone calls, ask some people where they buy their seed from and where they buy their plant material, and buy it from a reputable source from there. And then don't save your seed or tree to minimize threat from fungal, bacterial, or viral pathogens as well. So another key is manipulating the environment. Our main goal is to make the greenhouse environment less favorable to pathogens so we can eliminate that third factor on the disease triangle. The temperature, you should always avoid temperature extremes, so extremely hot temperatures or extremely cold temperatures. Right in the middle is going to be perfect, because this is going to minimize stress and make the plants less susceptible to those diseases because they're less stressed out. The humidity, the relative humidity should be below 90% at all times. If you have higher than 90%, that's when your diseases are going to be more favorable, and then you will have the environment conducive for the different diseases to be inoculated on the host. And then minimizing long periods of leaf wetness. So instead of doing the overhead irrigation, you want to do the bottom feeding irrigation, and you also want to have air circulation from the fans. This is going to be very important for you. Avoid tight plant spacing. Make sure those plants aren't touching each other. Even when the fan is going, you want to make sure even when they are blowing in the air that they are not touching each other, because that could lead to the spread of the inoculum. You want to provide good ventilation and airflow, vents, side curtains, or fans. You really want to make sure that airflow is going, because we don't want to have that buildup of moisture, because the buildup of moisture makes it more conducive for the disease to occur. And then in cool weather, flush humid air in the early morning and late afternoon, and this will help reduce the dew formation and condensation. Because when that dew formation and condensation occurs, that's more of the moisture buildup, and that could lead to leaf wetness and disease development. So water and irrigation are really tricky, because you don't want to overwater and you also don't want to underwater. You want to have that perfect medium, so that because the excess moisture can promote root and foliage diseases, but if it's too dry and you let the whole root ball dry out, it kills the plant. So where do you really find that happy medium? And it really just depends on what medium that you're growing the plants in and what kind of plant it is. But you don't want it to be just oversaturated constantly. You want to have the soil a little bit dry, but not the whole entire root ball completely dried. So you want to be doing that field test every single day to see where the plants are at. If they do need water, water it. But if they're oversaturated, there's no need to water it again. So I know I always say that the overhead irrigation has a lot of disadvantages, which it does, compared to the bottom feeding irrigation. But if you have to use overhead irrigation, you should do that early in the morning, so it could rapidly dry the foliage. This is going to occur early on, and it will minimize that water splash. All right, so different chemicals for disease control. You guys should know that you should use other practices and don't solely rely on chemicals to manage diseases. You could use, cultural control methods and environmental methods, which we'll later discuss. And the timing of these applications when you are using chemicals are very important. You should apply before symptoms appear or at first signs. So doing that proactive approach is going to be very beneficial, because as soon as those signs come up and that you have identified the correct disease, and that identification process is really important. You also want to maintain a regular schedule of applying these. So so you know how many days in between each application that you can wait. So making sure that these are all scheduled appropriately and documented so you're not over applying is going to be very important. And then proper calibration of the nozzles is also going to be very important. If you have the calibration off, you can be over applying the pesticide, which in return might cause the plant to severely decline. You want to make sure that you're wearing the corrective PPE, which is personal protective equipment, and that will depend on what kind of pesticide that you're using, and that will be found on the label, and the safety precautions that you need to be taking while applying these pesticides. Another thing with applying these different pesticides is you need an applicator's license. And I know a lot of you are currently or already have your applicator's license. And if you don't already, once you're finished with the program, you will end up taking that test and receiving your applicator's license. So that's going to be a really important certificate and license that you will be receiving if you haven't already. Another big one is the reentry interval after spraying, and the reentry interval is just saying after you apply, what is the amount of time that you have to stay away before entering, just because those chemicals could be very powerful and could cause issues for you if you do go in that area where the chemical was applied before the period is complete. And then you just want to be following the REI, which is reentry interval, guidelines on product labels, post warnings on entrance to greenhouses as well. And then the choices of the active ingredients are limited, just because we are dealing with the greenhouse controls, but there is still a lot available, which we will go over in the next couple slides. All right, some different greenhouse fungicides and bactericides. Mainly for fungicides, you can use like copper compounds or bactericides. It's broad spectrum fungicide and a protectant. And you could do Coside, Champ, Copper Profix, New Cop, and the numerous crops are also labeled except for lettuce. But you can use any of those. Like I said, really anything with that copper compound would be beneficial for fungicides and bactericides. All right, here's a couple more protectants, and just letting you guys know, a protectant, it just protects it from the disease or bacteria, the fungicide or bacteria that's coming. So it's used as like a proactive approach to this. Mancozeb or Maneb is broad spectrum fungicide, usually with the broad spectrum fungicides. And broad spectrum fungicides, broad spectrum in general means it has a broad view of a lot of the different fungicides that it will take care of. And that's the Coside, Champ, Copper Profix. And broad spectrum means that it covers a broad different fungicides, or I'm sorry, a broad sense of bacteria and diseases that it could cover, specifically diseases because it's fungicide. But it's not specific to just one. So it's going to cover a lot of different funguses. And these include Dethane, Maneb, and the numerous crops that are labeled for this. And then sulfur is used for powdery mildew or miticides as well. And this is, again, protectant and dusting sulfur. There's various brands for this, wettable sulfur, and the numerous crops are labeled excluding lettuce crops. And then we have Batran 75W, and that controls botrytis, covers cucumbers, lettuce, and tomatoes. Decree also controls botrytis or gray mold, more of the fruiting vegetables and cucurbits and leafy greens. Provocure Flex is mostly those root rots, Pythium, Phytophthora, damping off diseases. Scala is the control of Alternaria and botrytis, again, that gray mold, and the Terramaster EC control of Pythium. So here's a couple different fungicides that are used for greenhouses with softer chemistries, and it's organically approved. And this is Bacillus subtilis, which is broad spectrum fungicide. Serenade Max is the name that you guys will most likely hear for this. And it's approved in most greenhouse vegetables as well. And then you guys are familiar with this, like with hydrogen peroxide. So there's different peroxides. It's a broad spectrum fungicide for bacteria. And it's approved in most greenhouses with a low residue activity, and it's frequent if applications are needed. So the management of bacterial spot and canker bacterial disease in general is really prevention is the primary tool to manage those bacterial diseases using pathogen-free seeds and transplants. Avoid saving those seeds from previous crops, heirloom growers, make sure they're using that hot water or bleach soaks, and then use resistant varieties. But sanitation and prevention of spread is going to be really important, removing and destroying diseased plants, keeping heirlooms in an isolated spot, cleaning benches and tools, and not handling plants if the foliage is wet. If you're doing overhead irrigation, do it early in the day and don't overwater. And then you can also apply that streptomycin on a 5 to 7 day interval, and that's going to decrease that bacteria that's occurring with your plant material. And you can also be applying the copper as well. For viral diseases, there are no chemical options to decrease viral diseases, but cultural, just use resistant varieties if available, and then don't plant ornamental and vegetables in close proximity to each other, and then try to avoid handling tobacco products and wash hands frequently. You can clear weeds around fields and greenhouses and then control the insect vectors in the greenhouse. Those vectors are going to be a big factor in this virus disease management. So really controlling those vectors as best as possible.